interest of time, because I know everybody has busy schedules and stuff like that, might have to move. So maybe we'll just go ahead and get started. And so thank you for joining the ARO's pre-midwinter meeting webinars. We had last week we did a funding your scientific genius panel, and there were about 40 people online for that one. And we had a number of funding agencies, including federal and foundations, that joined in, and we had a very nice discussion. And today, I'm really happy that a number of our editors-in-chief from very prestigious journals in our field have joined. And so just maybe I'll briefly sort of do introduction of the panel. We want to talk a little bit about the journals, the options that we have in terms of publishing our research. Talk also about what, as a new investigator, new researcher, or even when you are somebody who has published in this field often, how is the publishing model changing, and where is my best fit to be able to publish my research. And thinking also about a lot of special issues that keep coming out from multiple journals, and how do we leverage all of that. So I'm really excited that we have a number of our editors-in-chief, as I said, who have joined. So just let me very briefly introduce all of them. So Dr. Christopher Sederoth is joining us from the Journal of ARO, the JARO. Dr. Larry Lustig is joining from the Autologous Neurotology, and Dr. Hoffer, who is under my name, also is joining from Autologous Neurotology Open. Dr. Ruth Litowski, is joining from Ear and Hearing, and Dr. Malmierka is joining as the new or newer, I should say, right? The editor-in-chief of Hearing Research. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Chris to sort of talk a little bit about JARO and what are some of the opportunities in terms of publishing for that. Also, the PDFs and stuff will be available to the participants afterwards, so we'll send them over. The webinar will be on ARO's website, so other participants can also see. So, Chris?
All right, wonderful. I'll try the screen sharing here, and now this, you should have it full screen. Is it correct? Yep, wonderful. So thanks a lot for the invitation. Apologies again for last year. I wasn't able to do it because I was also invited on another separate talk. So JARO is the journal of the ARO. So we're representing the whole community. And I'd like to show now a little bit of what we're doing. Formats, fields, and topics, it's a big thing. And in fact, anything that is presented at the ARO meeting is something that JARO would like to consider for publications. So you have different types of research articles. I'm going to put my laser pointer here so you can see this. And we've been expanding a bit the scope. So we're really now getting broader. Original research, which involves these different topics. Now we're expanding also with reviews, brief reports, commentaries, opinion, perspective, technical advances. The journal club, which is something interesting because it's dedicated for PhD students that can work in collaboration with a supervisor and do some kind of a perspective and commentary article, but on their own. So we're open to that. It's a bit the equivalent of what the Journal of Neuroscience also has as a journal club. So we're having that as well. In terms of research fields, we're going very broad also with human, animal models, neuroimaging, CT MRIs, epidemiology, transcriptomics, clinical trials, genetics, and organoids, for instance, on all of the topics that are listed here and are known to be presented at the ARO meeting. One maybe weakness in our name for the journal is that we're attracting a lot of submissions on head and neck surgery. We're not head and neck surgery and cancer. So it's only hearing and vestibular topics. Sensory systems can be considered too. And for this, we have a very large number of associate editors that can cover the vast variety of the topics that I just presented here. We're quite well distributed across the globe. USA versus Europe, and other continents also, some of these minorities are presented here. And we also have people in the editorial board that can assist in their reviews. Our impact factor, which is 2.4, the scores and the calculations are shown up here. We've been quite stable over the time in the years, just behind hearing research, a little bit further behind ear and hearing, but we're quite good, I'd say. We're in the first quartile for otolaryngology. About 30% of the articles are open access, and the other ones are available through those university deals. You can publish for free in JARO, or you can decide to make it open access, which is now quite a high fee, but I'm not deciding on this, unfortunately. So $4,690 for this. But you can check if you have institutional agreements with Springer, because then you can have a waiver for that publication in open access. And the interesting thing is that if you are an ARO member, you can access any of the articles that are published in JARO through the website from ARO. You can log in as a member, and then you can have access to all the articles without paying. So that's a good thing. This is some examples of publication highlights that we had from 2022. With here one article, the most cited here, which is 26 citations, systematic review on tinnitus, and one here on age-related hearing loss, which is 14 citations, which is reasonable for a specialty journal within 2 years' time. You can see here, this is, I'll take a little note, the different formatting of the articles. In fact, this on the right side is the older format of publication we had, which was really the classical one since JARO started. And we now moved away to this more standard Springer format, and I will explain a little why. So in the past, Paul Manus has been managing JARO until 2022. And it had a restricted scope. This is something that now enlarged to cover everything that is presented at the midwinter meeting. We had limited flexibility with the format, word limits, and things like that. Now we're really much more flexible in this regard, up to 12,000 words if you need, so no restrictions, number of figures, and supplemental materials is accepted. Before we had about 32 days until the first decision, and now we're reducing it to 14 days. So we also speed up the process. And the fact also that we changed now the format of the article, the processing time before publication has increased as well. So all of these like that, I have little figures to show you here. We've been increasing the number of submissions. Here I have data until 2023, but I can say that it's been ramping up in 2024. Number of downloads has been increasing. Time to first decision decreased as well. The trend is persisting in 2024. The time for acceptance to publication also, thanks to the new adaptations we've done. And this is also to compete with the massive, speedy process of publishing that is available in the publishing field now. And now very proudly also available at JARO is some of the podium and poster titles that are published just before ARO Midwinter meeting is launched, so you can access the titles on our website. This is openly and freely available. This is very good. I think because we're working in teams with the ARO, so this is kind of also a nice first step to join the two together. And we have some topical issues now ongoing, two that were very successfully completed, one on tinnitus and one in memoriam of Glenys Long on otoacoustic emissions. Very nice review papers. All of these were invited topics. And now we have some ongoing that are more open: hearing therapeutics, hearing loss in general, ototoxicity. Sphere vascularis, very specific, invited people only, and auditory neurons as well. So have a check on these, because maybe there is something that could be of interest for you. So I'm ready now for questions. Could be anything that Raj has been mentioning, before in emails, anything about where to publish, journal metrics, social medias and preprints. What about artificial intelligence? I don't know, maybe you want to open the discussion afterwards for this to have like a group panel or whatever.
Yeah, maybe that's what we
happy to
do
it.
is we just kind of, we go through the other discussions, and then we come back as a panel to kind of discuss it. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Litowski to tell us a little bit about ear and hearing. Um, Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just share my screen here. Great job, Christoph. Really interesting to hear about what's happening with Darrow. Wonderful journal. I'm going to tell you about Ear and Hearing, which is the journal of the American Auditory Society. It's a smaller society. Can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, if you can go to the display on the top and just swap the display so we see the main view and not the presenter view. Yeah, there we go. That side. Yep.
Wow.
Swap. There we go.
Yay.
There we go. Yay.
Awesome. Right. So this is what you see when you come to the journal for the early 2025. You could see our impact factor. We have 6 issues per year. And right now we're ranked 6 out of 65 in the whole field of otorhinolaryngology and number 1 out of 35 in the field of audiology, speech, and language pathology. And quite a few of the papers end up in maybe about 25% sort of desk rejected. And I think a lot of the justification when papers come in that really do not fit within the scope of the journal is this, which is that we put our highest priority on hypothesis-based empirical studies that translate scientific discovery to clinical practice in hearing and balance disorders. So papers that really sort of will look at a bunch of patients and give stats and say, this is something that people should look at, sort of descriptive papers, I think definitely have value in the archival literature, but they're not really a great fit for ear and hearing. The scope, which is on our website, and there's a lot of information there that gives more detail about the priorities, also has these areas that people can submit under, and this is where the editorial board has a lot of expertise. So we have a standing editorial board. They're called section editors. And then I've also been leaning into what are called guest editors, and these are people who review some papers, especially if I have a lot of papers that are coming in some of these areas. So these are the general areas that people can tick, and request to have an editor with expertise in those areas. And I put genetics here as an additional topic, although we don't get that many papers on genetics, and the editor who handles it is an editor at large. As Christoph mentioned, similarly, ear and hearing is free to publish up to the first 12 pages, then it's $150 per page. There are open access fees if people want to publish their work in open access. The last slide had the topics. This slide has the type of articles, and I think a lot of overlap with JARO. So the vast majority of what we publish are research articles. Once in a while, we'll get a randomized control trial, and reviews are important. We get a lot of sort of systematic and scoping reviews, which is, I think, something that more folks are trying to get into, especially using some AI tools. A brief report is really more of a very short research article. Point of view and perspectives are different ways to have folks write about an opinion or looking at a topic that's really hot in the literature and trying to raise awareness about that. As I mentioned earlier, and ear and hearing currently is number 1, but what you'll notice, which I've been talking with our publishers a lot about, is the fact that all of the journals have dropped in their impact factor. So we don't think that the drop generally in impact factor has any reflection on how important hearing research, audiology, auditory, and otolaryngology, and speech, and all that. The level of curiosity, interest, and excitement about the work is very similar across the entire field in science. Just the impact factors have have dropped. It's sort of a statistical thing that has to do with a bump that came up sometime during the pandemic, and then sort of a reduction in citations. But we really don't think it has anything. It's not a reflection of how excited the field is about our journals in general. I thought I would share just a little bit of data. You could see going back to 2019, that we have an increase in the number of articles published sort of relative to last year, but there was a big bump again at 2022 due to many people writing up data, I think, during the pandemic. A vast majority are research articles. And then in terms of topics, we get a lot in audiology and auditory disorders and a lot in cochlear implants. And we get a little bit less than 50% from non-native English speaking countries. So these are just some interesting data. And, ear and hearing has sort of had a bump in the number of submissions. I got 625 this past year. And again, you can see quite a bit from non-native English speaking countries, a lot more from Asia. We have over 2,000 people that we invite to review. It's been we're really leaning on reviewers a lot, and this is it's been really hard, I think, because people are getting invited to review for many journals. And so one of the things that we've been working on that I'll talk about is new reviewer training thing that we're doing. Another thing just to look at is the regional access when people download articles via Ovid last year. So you could see that about 30% were from the United States, but the majority were just from anywhere, around the world. We're getting more and more from China, a lot from sort of England, Australia, Turkey. So it's definitely becoming more international because I think these journals are now online, which makes them more accessible to a lot more folks. One thing that we're really trying to understand are the biases that can influence the judgment of the reviewers. And so we're having a lot of discussion at the editorial board about the fact that sometimes, depending on what bias reviewers have, even though we have a double-blinded review, when you first open up a paper, you might already have a bias about who might have written the paper. And so we're really trying to think about how to get the word out and talk to reviewers to reduce the bias or to eliminate the bias. And people can maybe not even accept the invitation to review or the amount of time that they spend on the review if they have a bias toward either the area or folks that they think might have written the paper. And the editors who are not double-blinded also, we're having a lot of discussions about bias in terms of who they might even recommend for awards. We have an annual award that's chosen by the editors. We also have, we see how many downloads there are, and folks get awards for the number of times that people have read the work. So in terms of the popularity in a way. So we're really trying to think about that in our field. And I'd love to talk more about that with the other editors. So as I mentioned, the reviewers are double-blind. There's a double-blinded process as to the identity and the institution of the authors. And we need to have more discussion about global perspectives in the community. And I think a lot of our journals have done a good job of having transparency in the author contributions and the responsibilities to promote integrity in scientific publication. Let's see. I think I'll stop there because I don't want to take up too much time. I know that other folks have really important and interesting things to say, but I can answer questions as we get into the Q&A part. Thank you.
Chris, just a question to you. Does JARO also have blinded reviews, or are these not blinded, right?
The name of the reviewer is blinded to the authors, but the author identity is not blinded to the reviewers.
I see. Okay, All right.
So far we've had reviews that were rather fair, and if we see something unfair or we get, a very blunt reply, we seek for additional opinions and so on, which is hard because then you have to also ask for extra reviewers. But I think this is a problem everybody's facing.
Right. All right. So with that, we'll pivot to Dr. Larry, to talk about ontology and neurotology.
All righty, let me bring this up. There we go. Share. And then can everybody see the correct version on screen? Good. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the journal, and then I'm going to sort of broaden it to talk about, because we're predominantly a clinical journal, but we do publish basic science and some tips for publishing more basic science in a clinical journal. So our journal is Otology and Neurotology. I'm the editor-in-chief. I've been the editor-in-chief since I took over from John DeParco in 2016. I'm the 5th editor-in-chief of this journal that was originally started by Michael Glasscock in the 1970s. So as you can see from the charge, we're predominantly involved in clinical and basic science aspects of otology, neurotology, and skull-based surgery. And that's going to include basic research and scientific advances. So a lot of the stuff that you would see at ARO particularly has a slight clinical bent. That's going to be fair game for submitting to our journal. If you look at the journal overall, we have an international distribution. You can see predominantly in the US, but really all over Europe, Russia, South America, et cetera. And if we look at the distribution online, again, it's a sort of a smattering of all over the world where our journal reaches. Like the other journals, we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of publications per year that we have. I've counted up really, since about its start, we've published over 10,000 publications. So and continue to grow on a yearly basis. Our acceptance rate's about 40%, and that's not because we actively strive for that. That's pretty much how things fall out, and it's varied between 35 to 45% over the last, say, decade or so. It takes about a month from the first submission to get a decision, and about 3 months for an acceptance if it's going to be accepted. And then once it's accepted, it's about 6 weeks to be published online. And if it's going to be in the printed issue, it'll be about 3 months. And as you can see, if you look at all the different topics that we publish on, basic sciences, it's not an insignificant part of what we do. So, we do about around 50 articles per year that deal with basic and translational science issues. Mike Hoffer will talk about sort of the ONN Open Journal, which is a separate journal, but we also have an open source option. It does cost extra money because you're basically paying for everything that the journal otherwise would be paying for. And when you do that, you retain the copyright for that, and it's freely available on the website. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about, if you're thinking about publishing in a journal like ours or another clinical journal, and you've got more of a basic science bent, here's some things that you want to think about before doing that. I think it's important to know your audience, right? Our audience is predominantly surgeons and clinicians dealing with ear-related issues and vestibular disorders. If it's too basic science and you don't have a clinical hook, it's oftentimes going to be pushed back to the author, right? So it's really critical, if you're going to be publishing in a more clinical journal, that you make it clinically relevant, even if it's a basic science topic. Why is, a hair cell physiology paper relevant to the clinicians who might be reading this paper? It's going to be really important to include that in the introduction and perhaps in the discussion. We're looking for original submissions that are high impact. We want new conclusions and insights into treatment and physiology. We don't want Me Too submissions, right? Just because we're a clinical journal does not mean we're going to accept anything that you throw at us. We recognize that there's a large standard of difference between human research and animal research in terms of the types of controls that are needed. That being said, if you're going to have a human study that you're going to be submitting, you need the appropriate controls. Just because we're a clinical journal does not mean we're not going to look at the kind of controls you're going to use. So again, it should be scientifically rigorous regardless of which type of study you're going to be submitting. Again, as I noted before, the study really needs to be clinically relevant. If it's just very dry, basic research, then oftentimes we'll actually reject it up front and recommend submitting it to one of the other journals that you've heard from today, or even a more basic science journal than that. Reviews are terrific, even reviews on basic science topics. You know, if somebody wants to submit a review on hair cell physiology, that's the kind of thing that we, you know, that's digestible to a clinician or a surgeon. That's the kind of thing that we'd love to see. And we're always looking for good reviews. I think all of the editors on this panel will probably agree with me, but a very common problem that we see, particularly for manuscripts coming from foreign countries, is that it has not been appropriately reviewed by an English editor. There's nothing worse from a reviewer standpoint than just having to stumble over bad English. So if English is not your native language, and you're not going to be discriminated if that's the case, just make sure it's reviewed by somebody who's fluent in English or even have professional English editing services. And most journals have a service that you can utilize, oftentimes for a cost, that will help you with that. Reviews, systematic reviews and meta-analyses are also sort of a newer type of review that most journals accept. We no longer accept just a standard review, a review article. If you're going to talk about a topic, you really want it to be a systematic review or a meta-analysis that really brings in modern database scientific analysis to whatever it is you're going to do. Again, I can't tell you how many people submit manuscripts to our journal, and I bet all the other editors will agree with me on this too. Just you got to follow the instructions. It's pretty basic, you know? So go to the journal that you're going to submit and read the author instructions. I can't tell you how many papers we bounce back because they didn't follow the correct format. They submitted it under the incorrect topic or category. So just do yourself a favor. Save us everybody a lot of headache, and read the instructions for the authors. Now, just because we're a clinical journal does not mean we take crappy science. I can guarantee you, if you're going to submit a hair cell physiology paper, you're going to get an equivalent high-level review that you would get in on any other of the journals that are being talked about today. We have really, really good high-level basic science reviewers, and they will not give you a pass just because this is otology and neurotology. I have Rana Hertzano as the basic science editor, and she will crush your bad submission. So do not disappoint her if you're going to submit to us. So if you have any questions, anything you want to ask about, I think a pre-letter to me or the journal staff is always appropriate to say, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think about this? And I think this goes for any of the editors in chief, just to make sure that the topic's correct, that the format's correct, and we're always there for you guys to answer any questions. And I'm done.
Larry, before we go to Michael, I just have a quick question. Did Dr. Hertzano agree to that picture and the statement that you put in?
I cannot count. I cannot document that the NIH has approved that message.
Okay.
I say it was approved when she was at the University of Maryland. I can't tell you that Trump approves it now. So I don't know. We'll see.
I thought you're allowed to show a picture. She worked for Health and Human Services.
All right. Well, we'll move to Michael Hoffer, Dr. Hoffer, who'll talk about the open version of sort of neurology, which is actually a separate journal. Michael, and also if you can touch upon how, if somebody submits to otology neurology, and do they also have an option to then, if they don't get selected over there, to kind of move towards the ONO with the reviews?
We'll talk about all that. Can people see my slides now or not?
Yeah, we can see it, Michael.
Okay. I'm going to talk more about open access publishing, and then I'll circle back around to otology and neurology open. Much of what Larry says about quality submissions and the ability to take a variety of different topics applies to ONO also, and we will crush your bad basic science also. So these are obviously very interesting times, have been very interesting, difficult times for publishing. And this is a message I gave originally several years ago, and it certainly hasn't changed. basically where we publish our work, how we publish our work, what we're allowed by our institutions or even our country to publish our work is changing, and how that is going to influence the way, in particularly our journal, it's owned by two societies. So how is that's going to influence the way societies who make money from journals, it's going to impact that a great deal. So open access is a system whereby the final version of an article is available online at no cost to the user, with limited restrictions regarding reuse. So the values are, for authors, your work can be seen by more people and eventually cited by more people. For readers, anyone can read it regardless of their access to a medical library or subscription. For funders, they get a wider distribution of where their work is being seen. And I think for science, free access to new developments really should be available to everyone. It shouldn't be dependent on being close to or associated with a medical library or have the ability to afford a subscription. So, and I think many of us on this call, the editors and those attending, agree that science is for everyone, not just for a select few. So there are two types of open access. The journals that we do, and many of the journals that you see, are what's called gold open access, and the final version is freely and permanently available on the internet. The copyright is maintained by the author, and that's important. Larry mentioned that if you publish online in otology and neurotology, you retain the copyright. That means you can use that information for future, you can't plagiarize it, but you can use it for future grants, etc., without having to get, or talks, without having to get permission. The article is available online and published fully, and these gold open access are generally by publishing houses. So ours is Wolters Kluwer, the exact same publishing house that does otology and neurotology, the parent journal, as it were. Green open access are self-archived. So they involve placing a version of the manuscript into a repository with a copyright retained by the original publisher, but not necessarily with a lot of oversight by a society or a publishing house. But they're not the next version. The next is predatory open access. So this is deceptive publishing, which charges a fee to authors to publish articles. Then there's no peer review and there's no oversight at all. They're often done for profit. They subvert proper knowledge development. They're unethical. We vigorously fight attempts to classify them as illegitimate. So we tried, the publishing industry went in and made a list of predatory open access journals, and then they went to court and got that taken off because they were like restraint of trade. But in reality, that website should have been, would have been helpful for authors. And they prey on junior investigators from third world countries. So there are some repositories that list predatory journals, although many of those have been taken down because of legal action. There is a repository called DOAJ that lists journals that have registered with them. They're allowed to do that, and they will not put predatory journals on their site. And you want to look for, if you're concerned, look for parent journals. For our journal, look for the fact that there is a otology and neurotology, a journal that you recognize. For some of the other science and nature both have open access journals, and clearly they have parent journals that people respect and know. Preprint servers are very interesting. They're a location, a server for posting papers not yet accepted by traditional academic journals and not yet peer reviewed. They used to be considered unethical and improper, and now they're all the rage. I mean, obviously they became all the rage during COVID, when 85 million labs were doing COVID research, and you wanted to plant your flag in the ground before the guy or gal across town did. So they become much more mainstream, and they avoid getting scooped, and you get feedback while you're on these repositories from people saying, hey, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? They're so mainstream that science and nature will take open access, will take publications submitted that were originally on a preprint server. And we do too. And so many of your open access only journals are a nice repository to permanently publish these preprint server papers, which again are becoming much more mainstream as a way of planting your flag and maybe getting input from colleagues around the globe. So that's a flexibility that the open access only journals seem to have a little bit more than the print journals. So we have article processing fees, and that means that the author pays fees, and it's considered when open access first started as like, if I have to pay for someone to publish my work, then my work, it's somehow illegitimate. Well, in reality, you're paying. You're at hopefully if you're at a well-funded or somewhat well-funded United States university or international university, you're paying so people in third world countries can read this for free. So it's not really illegitimate. What you're doing is you're allowing access to the whole world to see it. And that's the way we see it. And that's the way, Belgium and there are countries in Europe that only allow open access publishing. The University of California, I think they changed. Now they used to be only open access. Now they allow non-open access, but they highly, highly, highly desire open access. And any new DoD grant that you get in the United States has to be published in an open access only journal. The fees can vary. Ours are $1,500 a year. They can be $15,000 a year if you want to publish in Nature's open access edition. And we know it's a burden. And so we have in our journal a scholarship fund. So if you write to us and you say that either a trainee has written the article, or someone, any training, PhD training, MD training, student, we have a scholarship fund that's actually funded by pharmaceutical and medical device companies that will pay that. And then those companies are listed on our website, but they have no control over what gets published, nor are the individual names of any company attached to an article. It's just the scholarship fund in general paid for the article. The other thing is we have some, a number of other ways of waiving your fees if there's a legitimate need. Again, the goal is to get the information out to the world, not to take someone's research money. So if there's a problem with our fees, rest assured we'll find a way around that for you. Also, the open access fees for open access only journals are sometimes less than the open access fee for the parent journal open access version. And I think that's really all I'm gonna go into. Otology and neurotology open, very similar cover to what Larry showed. We are essentially a way for otology and neurotology to have more pages, to feature some more articles that are very lengthy, that would really take up many of Larry's pages. When Larry gets a paper, there's three options that he has. One, of course, is accept. One is reject outright, and the other is reject and transfer. And meaning that now we'll look at it, and we're not, again, taking schlocky. If it's bad science, he rejected it outright. It's only coming over to us if Larry liked it and just says, listen, I only got so many pages a year. We'll give it a thorough review, and we really encourage people to. We did a review of all the articles that Larry sent over last year. We accepted some, we rejected some, but in the ones we rejected, the ones that rejected us, in other words, Larry offered the transfer, and they did not accept the transfer. About 50% of those got published. They took on average 9 months to get published, and they on average paid twice as much as otology and neurotology open would have cost them. So if they had just accepted Larry's transfer, they would have gotten published, probably 3 or 4 months earlier at half the price, or maybe even gotten a scholarship and done it for free. So much like Larry said, we do really encourage some of the more clinical articles, and even some of the basic science articles from ARO to be submitted to, either us directly or Larry originally, and then if passed down to us, accept the transfer. Trust me, it'll be much quicker and much better for you financially.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So with that, we'll go to Dr. Malmienka, who recently started as the editor-in-chief at Hearing Research. And he was there a number of years as an associate editor. So please, Manuel.
So I have a little, let me see if I have a small presentation, if I can do that. Can you see it? Did you see my presentation?
You may want to go to presenter mode.
Where did it go? What happens here?
Yeah, it's not sharing the full screen yet, just as it's stuck on the first slide as a PowerPoint.
Can you see or not yet?
Yep.
Yeah.
You got it.
Great. Okay. Well, first, I mean, Hearing Research has been in the business for many years. It was founded by Oge Moller back in the early 70s or something like that. And basically, we aim to publish papers that are concerned with the basic peripheral and central auditory mechanisms, and we like to do emphasis on basic research and also clinical studies, but we also accept theoretical and methodological studies. So, the type of papers we publish are original papers, review, mini reviews, rapid communication, method protocols, perspective, everything. And, we accept papers related to auditory anatomy, physiology, psychophysics, imaging, modeling, behavioral studies, both in humans and in animal studies, as well as, hearing aids and cochlear implants. So, and we also deal with some vestibular system studies, not only just the auditory system. So the audience that we think we look for, it's audiologists, biologists, otologists, physiologists, neurologists, neuroscientists, and psychologists. And yeah, so basically, I guess this is more or less the same thing. We have a board of editors, of sections editors, that is made by Stephen David from Oregon, Ek Friau from Kaiserslautern in Germany, Xinyu Fu from California in Los Angeles, Rona Hersano, as was before mentioned, she's from Maryland, Lisa Olson from New York in Columbia, Tony Ritchie, he's in Stanford, and recently we invited Elizabeth Strickland from Indiana and Thanos Thonopoulos from Pittsburgh. And then we have a number of editorial board members from all over the world, basically from Europe, States, South America, a few from Asia also. So basically, what I'm going to tell you very little. Basically, you can see here some statistics on the number of submission, rejected, and accepted papers along the years. So we get around between 150 to almost 800 papers. The number of submissions is quite stable, and we rejected about 60% of the papers, so the acceptance rate is about 40%. And as I said, for instance, in 2024, we got 420 original research paper submitted, 50 reviews, 13 short communications, and 6 short reviews. As you can see here, the rejection rate that it's done usually is like that. Then we publish also as a subscription, as an open access, and you can see how progressively along the years there are, like in 2021, most of the papers were made by subscription and very few by open access, and now it's almost 50-50% open access and subscription. So articles are submitted from all over the world. There is probably a large number from Asia, many of them coming from China. The second largest probably is the Europe, and then North America and Central America, and then from Australia, South America, and Africa. And yeah, and this is kind of the outcome that we get again from the accepted papers. So most of the accepted papers are coming from North America and Europe, and then a little bit less from Asia. So there is a lot of papers coming from Asia, but the rejection rate is larger in Asia than the accepted ones. And then here we have the trend in the top countries by ratio for submission. So again, China is by large the country that submitted the most, followed by the States, then India, Germany, Turkey, and so on. And again, the largest number of accepted papers are coming from the United States, then China with a relatively slow number, and so on. And yeah, so then again, this is also the submission and the rejection by desk and the standard rejection date and the accepted one. So again, the States and Europe, particularly Spain, is where we are getting the most. We do a lot of special issues so we have something that is what we call the annual reviews. This is a kind of flagship that it was launched a few years ago by Barbara Canlon, the past editor, and it's been really successful, and I would love to continue with it. So we get invited reviews to kind of distinguished famous scientists, and they are very, very good. And then we have also special issues apart from that. So one was like edited by Kristen Copeland and Sonia Payot on comparative approaches to investigating principal hearing. Another one on brain plasticity and deafness by Andrei Kral and Pascal Baron, and one actually edited by myself about the history of neuroscience in Spain. So the speed of the editorial handling has decreased again substantially over the years. So now you see that, like for instance, in 2022 it took 153 days for a paper to get finally accepted or rejected, and the first decision was about 61 days, and as you can see, it's been decreasing. Now it's too early in 2025 because I've been just for a month, so it's not really significant, this reduction, but I'm sure it will be maintained somehow. And then the journal Biometrics, well, this is just the impact factor, so we are more or less all about the same, around 2.5 per 2.6, so I don't think it's so important. So I think that's all I would like to tell you.
Thank you, Manuel. So there's a question from George. I know Chris is writing back in the comment section, but it's about opinion and commentary articles, right? And he's asking about whether do they need the same rigor as more traditional review paper. And do they offer a unique point of view or seek to attract a more general audience? So any thoughts? Especially about the second question, do they offer like a unique viewpoint, or is it more about a general audience and addressing that for the journals?
So I would say, there's a couple different options that you have here, depending on what it is. So oftentimes we'll have a letter to the editor. Sometimes these are disguised as sort of a little mini research paper, or we'll kick those out right away, right? But if it's a genuine question to the authors, and we'll submit that letter to the authors and then publish them both side by side. Now, occasionally most editors in chief have some options about sort of special submissions under their purview, and we'll sometimes do that if there's a unique issue that needs to be discussed and someone's got some expertise, I'll have somebody write in and do that. But if it's it's not a way of sneaking in a research paper to a journal. It's a way of just maybe a special opinion piece, like if you wanted to write in about sort of the travesty of politics and government funding of auditory research. Something like that is okay, but not to try to do it as a sneaky way to put a research paper in that's going to get bounced.
Yeah, I think I agree with Larry that the classic is it's a paper. If it's a letter to the editor, ask a question, and because we want to actually give that to the original author so they can respond.
Yeah. Also, Chris, I know like earlier you had mentioned that you had an explanation for the drop in sort of like the metrics for all the journals, and we were discussing that before the webinar kicked off. Maybe we can discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Everything happened. Some of the journals had an increase in the impact factor, and that was because of COVID papers. That's one explanation for the rise. But then the drop down It happened coincidentally with the fact that many journals became online only. And usually Clarivate would calculate the score on citations, and depending on the number of articles published within a year, but published was meant within an issue. And now, since many journals had that option of having online first, it scrubbled all the scores, and then Clarivate decided that they would take into account those papers that were already online first, not the ones published in an issue. So that, impacted the scores, and supposedly it's going to be stable now and catching up as normal expected.
And I know, like, a lot of us, we, for better or worse, right? Like, we do get judged by the impact factor and the number of publications and stuff like that. And certainly, like, again, like, I was thinking from my early days, like when I was thinking about where to publish the papers, I'm wondering about, like, if you guys have any commentary, any of you, about how does one go about selecting the most appropriate journal? Given that if I think about my research, I think it fits in all of your journals, right? So which journal should I be submitting to?
Well, clearly the answer is mine.
After
I think,
first after mine.
yeah, I think if it's more clinically related, there's a number of things that go into this, right? I mean, there's no easy answer to this. I would think about who the audience is going to be, number one. Like if you want it to reach like a bunch of surgeons and a bunch of surgeons, ONN or ONN Open seems like a good choice. If you're more of a basic, if there's a lot more basic translational research, maybe, one of the more basic science journals, oftentimes people will make a decision based solely on impact factor. Although I think that's kind of the impact factor is flawed, as we all know, but it does drive a lot of submissions. And think about the reach of that. I think in the day when everybody can search anything they want in Medline, it's not as much of an issue. So the final consideration is, where do you think your paper is going to get the best reception and have the most likelihood of getting through the process?
I mean, Larry's point is, I keep echoing Larry's points, but it's well taken. I mean, the bottom line is, at least me, maybe just me, but when I do research on a topic, I'm going to go to a site that's going to give me all the journals articles, everybody here and other journals. So, I don't read that many journals. I read our sort of industry, otology and neurotology cover to cover, but otherwise, I'm just getting the news as I'm researching a topic, and so it's not as important, I think, as it used to be where you publish.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think there are difficulties in the field, and one challenge is if you have a good paper that you would think has a high impact chance, to get there, you need to find a journal where there is an editor that knows about hearing, and this is rare. This is not very frequent. So, and some journals don't have that very visible. So you might, hit PNAS, might hit JCI. This is coming a bit better. So I'd say we need to get our arrow people into those high ranked journals to increase the chances for the visibility of our field. So once you've tested that up and you go down the impact factor ladder scale, I would go for those specialty journals like us, because this is where fair review, good constructive review will happen. You'll get good quality papers out. I've been editor before joining JARO for Frontiers, and we had like a special issue on tinnitus that was very fun to deal with. But afterwards, I've seen a lot of weaknesses in that system where you had automated invitation of reviewers where me as an editor, I didn't even approve. So, usually if an editor is slow, you get a reminder. No, they would start automatically, seek for reviewers, and then suddenly I would get reviewers' feedback. And so, but I've never chosen that and was so shallow. I cannot accept these things. So there are other journals we mentioned, about predatory concepts. Some are borderline, but I'd say once you've tested above and you reach down, as Larry was saying, look at the scope of what's inside, what the aim is. how many journals, how many articles we get from head and neck cancer, and it has nothing to do with what we're doing. So people
I'm
don't.
gonna add one. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to add one more quick point, which is that a lot of the folks who are interested in this particular conversation are going to be junior scientists and early stage investigators who are thinking about applying for jobs, applying for grants, going on the job market. And I think that, as long as folks who are on the tenure review committee or folks who are writing letters of support understand that area-specific journals like those in our field are the gold standard in many ways, because they really have, we have very high expectations of the quality of the work. It just speaks really well for someone, to be able to publish. So another journal that we're not covering here is the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America, which in a way has one of the lower impact factors, but is very hard to publish in. It is the gold standard in psychophysics and in speech and in a lot of the work that now has to do with cochlear implants. And I think it just has to do with the number of citations in this sort of internal citations that tend to be high. But so anyway, I just want to say that I think all the journals that are represented here that are very specific to our field are top notch in our field. And I think it's what I don't love to see is I'll get a paper and then the reviewers or even the section editor will say, I saw this exact same thing when I reviewed it for another journal. They didn't change a thing in response to the reviews. It was rejected there. They just tossed it in this direction. So I think the advice to our authors is it's a small community.
Yeah.
And so your reputation is going to also depend on how people view resubmissions and, multiple submissions, because, it gets around a little bit, that if people are not taking to heart, and to mind the hard work that the reviewers put into giving feedback. So.
And then if
If I can,
Manuel, sorry, Hoffer.
no, I was going to say that actually, even though, the impact factor we have in our journal, which is more or less about the same, it's relatively low, say, compared with Nature or things like that. But, all of us are within the Q1. So in a way, the absolute impact factor may be relatively low, but we are Q1. So, and that's something which is very, very good, and so probably it's better to publish in one of our journals than publish in one of the general neuroscience journal where, yeah, okay, it may be a little bit higher, the impact factor, but it's not going to be a Q1. So in terms of, as Ruth says, for the young people looking for grants and papers and so on, it's actually very good to publish in our specialized journal, I think.
Absolutely. I know that we're at time, but I did want to just quickly ask you guys about the use of AI in papers and how your journals are dealing with that. And this might be just more of a me question, but
well, maybe if I can say, I mean, I'm not against artificial intelligence. I think the problem is not to use artificial intelligence, but to disclose it. And you can ask, for instance, like me being a Spaniard, I write something in English, so it's very good to ask to correct it the English. But then I check that I have it really, it's doing what I really asking to do, not wherever. So if you have full command of the AI, it's great. It's very helpful. It's like 50 years ago, the way we used to make posters, now we use PowerPoint, which is very easy. I used to use glue and paste, so it's like, it's a tool. It's technology, it's an advance. And this is like, you have a knife. A knife could be terrible because it can be used to kill someone, but a knife being used by a cook will give you a great meal. So you have to have common sense and use it in good faith, and then I think it's great.
I was going to say, you also, if you're going to use AI as some in part of your research or writing your paper, you need to include that in the methods and be upfront about how you're using AI. It's okay to use it. You just have to be very explicit how it's used.
Absolutely, this is what I said, that you need
Chuck, we have
disclose
that
what
on
you
our,
really.
we have that on our submission page. It says where to put it and what to say about AI and what it
Yep.
can be used for.
All right, Chris, last words, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I guess I've been very, very puzzled by that topic. Because I would say for young ones, we're now facing this also. I've got trainees, I've got PhD students, and I can feel when they've been modifying a text through ChatGPT or something like that, because I can see that there is something that is not natural formulated there. So advices for those who are here eventually, just for typos and grammar corrections, okay, but don't expand it to try to make it sound a little blurry or selling, because then you're modifying exactly everything there. If you have an original research article, maybe that is harder to do, but if you have a review, an opinion paper, commentary, we've seen journals getting a bunch of these that are, there's no data that restricts the flow and the way you can express yourself. So there's much more freedom and maybe this ability to go over the barrier of the use of the AI. And I'd say for the young ones, it'll be easier, for train how to formulate things your way. Read good papers, read the papers in the big journals, because they have fantastic talent for this. I've had the chance to publish articles with 2 Nobel Prize winners. They don't use ChatGPT, but they talk in a way that's just magnificent like that. So inspire yourself from good articles, learn the style, and have that as your own masterpiece, and then use that, because once you have it, and once you've learned it, it's like bicycle. It will come with a flow, and it'll be natural, and it'll be very good. So, okay, AI, but construct your style, make it your own. And that's my advice for the young ones.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. Very wise words. And thank you again, all of you, for really joining and talking about these different journals. We really, really appreciate you all. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks in Orlando.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Bye,
everybody.
buddy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Travel safe. Bye.